Hi, good morning. The first thing I want to tell you is to completely ignore the bio, which talks about my interests in space. But what I'm going to talk to you about today is genes. Not these, but G-E-N-E-S. How many of you have done your genes? Have you had your genes tested, done it? Not very many. Okay. How many of you would like to? Oh, well, you're a very experimental crowd then. So what I'm going to tell you today is a little bit about what you might find out, and to be honest, what you might not. Full disclosure, I'm on the board of 23andMe, which is one of the companies that does direct-to-consumer genomes. This is not a commercial for them, but I didn't want to not mention it, and I'm going to show you some of my own screenshots along with some other stuff like that. So people think, Sarah was talking earlier, is it in your genes to become an entrepreneur? Is it in your genes to die at some particular point or to get some particular disease? By and large, it's not really. What you really know is pretty true for everybody. There are people who believe in life extension and so forth and so on, but chances are pretty good. I'm in my late 50s. I will be dead in 40 or 50 years. That's based on almost nothing except that my parents are long-lived. For a lot of people, you can have some indication simply by how old you are. There are also lots of statistics, and nobody pays too much attention to that. They're more interested in themselves. They want to know when they're going to die, and also they want to know how. Now, yes. If you actually looked inside a lot of people's heads, you'd see they had a 200 or 300 chance of dying because they think, 30% I'll get run over in the street, 50% I'll get shot in a bad neighborhood. And so for many people, death in some weird way is a fate worse than death. They don't think about it very rationally. And this is a really serious point. When many people don't want to think about death, they don't want to think about how they're going to die. And so they're far more afraid than they need to be. The fact is, no matter what happens, your chances of death are only 100%. They're not more. And what's really interesting is not when you're going to die, but how you're going to live before you die. And that is not just the diseases you die of, but the diseases you are going to have over time. Here are my genetic risks from 23andMe. As I mentioned, I'm on the board. I love this company. But the reality is, my father had colon polyps. I've had colon polyps. So the numbers on here for colon polyps are actually way, way low versus the reality. If I didn't treat it and I didn't die of something else for 30 or 40 years, I'd probably get colon cancer and might or might not die from that. So you have to look at your genetic risks in concert with others. And you also have to understand that you can really change those risks. Type 1 diabetes is very much heritable. Type 2 diabetes is not. Type 2 diabetes is maybe 25% heritable and is very much a factor of your behavior, mostly what you eat and whether you exercise, a few other things. So different genetic things have very different meanings and also give you much better or less predictability. And understanding that is key when you look at your genomes. They do not tell you as much as we would like to know. They're kind of like the building blocks, but you don't know how much of the building blocks are being used. You don't know the architecture. You don't know the urban planning, so to speak. And you can change your odds. This is a Fitbit. Tells me how many steps I take every day. I try to reach 10,000. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't, the more I walk. And of course, I swim every day. That changes my odds dramatically from what you would get simply from looking at my genes. Another thing I do is I sleep more than most people. And I try and make sure I get good sleep. This is a company called MyZeo that you wear this little headband, and it tells you how much you're sleeping. And I'll get into this later. It's fascinating stuff because it's about me. It would be fascinating. It could be fascinating to you, too. And I've seen it change my behavior. When I'm at a party, sometimes I'll think, you know, if I left now, I would get 10 points more on... And 9 times out of 10, that's the right decision. But things happen. So this summer, I found a lump in my breast. And let me tell you the punchline right away. It was not cancer. So this is not one of those wonderful, oh my God, she's so brave and courageous talks. But I was brave and courageous for about a month between the time when they found the lump, the biopsy, the surgery. It was a very, very interesting time. And having worked with 23andMe, having thought about this stuff, I was not as freaked out as you might expect. I did actually think I had cancer, a whole bunch of reasons. And so I thought, well, do I want to have radiation? Do I want to have chemotherapy? I looked at the figures. They are very, very complicated. The first thing to understand is odds are just odds. No matter what happens in the end, 1 out of 8 women get cancer in their lifetimes, 7 out of 8 don't. But in the end, it's not what your chances are until the very end when you find out. Your chances are either 100% or 0 in retrospect. But the chances of the impact of chemo, the impact of radiation, those are also similarly complicated. They will tell you such and such a treatment reduces recurrence by 30%. But if recurrence is 30%, that's only a 10% improvement. Is it worth the consequences? And given the statistics I just cited, probably some of you in this audience have already faced this issue. Some others of you are going to. And the numbers are only one part. You need to figure out how it fits into your own life, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, this is what happened with me. I figured if I had breast cancer, the costs of going into space were less. Because there was less life to lose, less of life, not a life, but less of my life that I was putting at risk if I went up into space earlier before the thing was really tested. So these were my new odds for about a month this summer. Then it turned out my mother had a history of benign breast lumps, which I didn't know about. So even before the surgery, suddenly my odds changed for the better. Oh, well, it's completely rational that this would not actually be cancer, but something like what my mother had. And that is what it turned out to be. But you never know. Next year, I could get breast cancer or colon cancer. So back to the genes. We know very little from our genes. We need more research. And this is what 23andMe and many other companies are now doing. They're collecting data. Because here, read this carefully. The secret is in here. Your entire genome is huge and much more than anybody knows what to do with. A company like 23andMe has a 100-word glossary. Every month now, there are new scientific studies that are finding new correlations between genes. New words. Oh, this has something to do with breast cancer. This has something to do with your bone porosity. But we don't really know the grammar. We don't know what affects what. And so what we have now from 23andMe is an annotated essay. But how do these words all connect? We don't know. So the early users of 23andMe are benefactors, much less than they are beneficiaries. Anybody who's getting their genes done now, other than people looking for very specific things like the BRCA for breast cancer or some very, very deterministic diseases, is by and large contributing to the body of research, we hope. And so at 23andMe and other places, we ask people, the irony is it's much easier to get genetic data. It's digital. Once you've got it, it's pretty clear. It doesn't change. What changes is the meaning and the connections to the phenotypes. As I showed earlier, we don't know how these genes interact, but this is me. I think this is my marker for diabetes. And so, some things seem to protect me, those are the green ones. Some things seem to make my chances of getting it worse. And as I said earlier, my behavior probably has more impact than almost anything. Other little things genes will tell you are your reactions to certain kinds of drugs. And I actually believe the most useful thing that genes will do over the next few years is help people predict their responsiveness to various drugs, whether it's a question of dosage or will this drug help me at all? Will it have toxicities? These are things that tend to be easier to pull out than the complex interactions around various conditions, most of which have a multiplicity of interacting causes. Also, just on the fun side, you can compare yourself to relatives. Up here, you have me compared to my brother, and as you can see, the blue is where we are half alike, where we got genes either from our father or our mother that we shared. The black is where we got the same genes from both mother and father. This stuff, it's fundamentally useless and endlessly fascinating. And on the right, you can see this is a distant relative I found through 23andMe, whom I don't know. The way the technology for finding, this is maybe a 7th or 8th cousin, the technology for finding this, interestingly, is very similar to plagiarism. Go back to that Russian novel, and if you found 3 paragraphs that were identical in 2 different novels by different authors, plagiarism or relative. And finally, this is the one I really love to do. These are all relatives. I have 26 relatives in the system. And you can compare yourself to other people. You can also compare yourself to friends. The reason this is slightly more interesting than sheer narcissism is I think we're going to find that Jews and Arabs are related much more than they are, for example, to Africans. We will find with more intermarriage and people moving around, it's going to be clearer and clearer how much we are one single species versus the guys that Matt Mountain is going to find somewhere else. So what I'd like to do in closing is just tell you it's worth finding out more about yourself. Beyond that, it's worth understanding statistics so that you understand not just the numbers, but the meaning and how much your own behavior, your health behavior, your activities, whether you take up skydiving, is far more important to the future than just the genes you were born with. Thank you very much.